If you're willing to clean toilets for something and clean floors and mop floors and windows for a dream, for a vision, I mean, you pretty much do anything.
That is Eduardo Placer, the founder of Fearless Communicators, a public speaking coaching business, talking a little bit about his journey of becoming a full-time actor before becoming the founder of Fearless Communicators, what he works on full-time today. Now today, Fearless Communicators ranks over $700,000 in annual revenue, and they're not just your typical public speaking coaching business. They take a little bit of a different approach. Now, if you know anything about public speaking, it's historically been taught by using methods from the 1980s, which treat public speaking mostly as more of an intellectual exercise and one that is mainly taught just by white guys, so guys like me. And if you're not a white male or maybe not an intellectual, you're smart, but you don't really think academically, public speaking, in the trainings really hasn't represented everyone. And Eduardo kind of noticed this and has built Fearless Communicators off of these ideas of, okay, let's not just treat it as an intellectual exercise, let's treat it as an emotional, a physical, and a spiritual exercise. So that way you can bring your whole self to public speaking. And it's worked out pretty well. Eduardo and his team have worked with people like Kerry Washington so they can elevate the positive difference that they are making on the world. It's proof that social impact and money don't have to go in opposite directions. They can work together. So in this video, let's actually go through how Eduardo and his team have been able to get over $700,000 in annual revenue. And to do that, let's start at the beginning of Eduardo's story, where he grew up. Now, Eduardo grew up in Miami, Florida after his family moved from Cuba to Miami. He went to an all-male Catholic school, and he has an identical twin who seems to be kind of the opposite of him. As Eduardo put it when I was chatting with him, he mentioned that his brother would play War with G.I. Joe, and he would play War, the musical. Quite a bit of a difference there. Now, even through growing up, Eduardo has always been an activist. He's always been advocating for social impact, or at least positive impact, in a lot of different ways. He had pro-Clinton signs happening right after he graduated from high school, and he even started an environmental club where it became such a positive impact, they actually were able to ban styrofoam from his high school before he graduated. After graduating from high school, he ended up going to an Ivy League university, the University of Pennsylvania, from 1995 to 1999, where he majored in English and was heavily involved in the arts throughout his entire time at UPenn. He was president of the Glee Club and participated in the Choir and Choral Society there. With his love for the arts and wanting to become a full-time actor, Eduardo moved to the home of Broadway to New York City, so that way he can get the right opportunities to become a full-time actor. One big problem though, these entry-level kind of acting opportunities only paid about $200 a week. And if you know anything about just like living expenses, and particularly in New York City, you're not going to live off $200 a week. And Eduardo needed to pay rent, but also a $9,000 loan back from college. So he ended up doing kind of the opposite of acting and ended up getting a job in HR and human resources at Standards & Poor. So that way he could pay rent and the bills that he needed to. And the interesting tidbit that I really found fascinating here is he also was taking 10 dance classes a week. And to do that, to afford them and also get the opportunity, he was then cleaning toilets, as he mentioned at the very beginning of this video. So to have the dedication to kind of to have this full-time job of HR, which was probably pretty soul-crushing, and then also just go into and then start cleaning toilets, that's a pretty big commitment. And if you have that level of commitment, I think you're going to make it work eventually. And eventually he did. He ended up getting his master's in fine arts at the University of California in San Diego, and was there from 2004 to 2007. And while he was there, he also started two different side hustles. One was a photography business, and another was a public speaking coaching business. The photography business came from he was at a friend's wedding. He was taking photos for them, and his friends ended up coming to him and saying, actually, your photos are better than our wedding photographers. So that was a pretty easy business to go start up. And also, if you're doing acting, right, you're speaking a lot in front of crowds and in front of audiences. So teaching people how to do public speaking is a pretty natural business to then start as a side hustle. But even with these two different side hustles, his focus was entirely on becoming a full-time actor. And he was able to become a full-time actor in 2007, and it took him all over the United States. It took him from New York City to Boise to Cleveland to Chicago and to Ashland, Oregon, of all places. And he worked as a full-time actor from 2007 to 2014, where acting was his full-time income. Now, in his last acting gig in Ashland, Oregon for the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, he was tasked with leading the 26th year of the HIV/AIDS fundraiser as part of that entire festival. And Eduardo mentioned that this is kind of when he started to make the shift away from acting. But instead of me explaining why this kind of started the shift away from acting, let me actually have Eduardo explain it himself.
My last stint was at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashland, Oregon, and I was tasked with producing their HIV and AIDS fundraiser that they'd been running at that point for 25 years. So I came in on the 26th year, which was supposed to be a dud. And I said, okay, thank you so much for giving it to me. We're not creating events or producing events. We're going to end AIDS. That's the energy that we're putting behind this thing. I expanded it from 6 events to 10 and raised 40% more than it ever raised before. And then I was like, this is interesting. And then I also noted that at that point, I was in my mid 30s. I could see elder actors in a career that was not giving back in the way that one gives to an acting career. I would say living in New York City and being an actor is like being in a relationship with someone who's just not that into you. When they're into you, it's amazing. It's like, oh my God, we kissed with tongue and you looked in my eyes. And then you don't look at me for a year. We don't even touch each other. But the time we held hands was really magical. It's a toxic relationship. For me, I was just ready to be in the driver's seat of my life, to be in the driver's seat of income generation, to be in the driver's seat of creation. And that's where entrepreneurship became a very clear option.
And now you know why I had Eduardo explain that, because I definitely could not have done that any justice. So he ends up ending his toxic relationship with acting here, and it's now the beginning of 2015, and he ends up going full-time on his public speaking business, Fearless Communicators. And there's two main concepts here that made Fearless Communicators what it is today. The first concept that Eduardo mentioned to me that was really beneficial in helping to create the mission of Fearless Communicators was this concept of tikkun olam, which means world repair in Hebrew. And it ended up kind of transforming Fearless Communicators into wanting to help elevate people who are poised to make the biggest difference. So in a lot of ways, this kind of defined who the target market would be for Fearless Communicators. They didn't just want to work with anyone. They wanted to work with people who are going to make the biggest difference in the world. And then the second concept that was really helpful for Fearless Communicators to kind of build it into a unique niche and into more of like a blue ocean, if you're into that kind of concepts, was that it was shifting away this public speaking from an intellectual exercise. It was shifting public speaking into more of a physical, emotional, and spiritual piece, because that way people can bring their whole selves to public speaking. And it's not just like this academic version of public speaking. It doesn't feel like it's all pressure. It's more of, okay, how do you actually bring your entire self to public speaking? And that way also people who didn't feel maybe represented in a lot of different ways of public speaking trainings is they can actually be represented because they can bring their whole selves to public speaking. So between the concept of tikkun olam and the kind of shifting away from the intellectual exercise, Fearless Communicators has really built kind of this unique niche of public speaking coaching, and it's obviously worked, but it took a little bit to get going. Now in 2015, they had $13,000 of revenue, which is, you can't really live off of that, but it was a start. In 2017, they had over $100,000 in annual revenue. And by 2018, they had $300,000. In 2021, they had $500,000 of revenue. And today, in 2024, they have over $700,000 in annual revenue. So that's the high-level story of Eduardo and Fearless Communicators. But let's dive a little bit deeper into how Fearless Communicators has gone from $13,000 in annual revenue in year one all the way to $700,000 in annual revenue. And let's talk about the growth strategy. There's 3 different growth strategies here. The first growth strategy I want to talk about is relationships from past and current opportunities. Now, as you can kind of notice, right, even just like kind of going through this story, Eduardo has a lot of different networks he can pull into and tap into, and that's what he's done to really start Fearless Communicators. So obviously he went to UPenn for undergrad, which is a huge network and a really powerful network, but also, right, he traveled a lot for acting. So he's got all these different networks in that. And then, right, he did the HIV/AIDS fundraiser, which is going to give him some opportunities and new networks. But also, right, he's continued to do that. So he's even a board member at places like the Out Foundation and the Cuban American Alliance for Leadership and Education. So he has all these different networks, and the way, right, Eduardo kind of thinks about it, he made this one comment when I was talking with him that really stood out to me when he talks about networking, is that he says, I don't have an abundance of money, but I do have an abundance of love. And what he's really done is kind of just like loving on people. I'm going to invest in people in ways that, right, that are not transactional. They're really relationships. And he just keeps like, loving on people. And it gets back a little bit to like, okay, put out in the world what you want to attract, and that's who you're going to attract. And by loving on people and investing in people, people are going to do that right back to you. And that's really paid off for Eduardo. And it's also really telling, right? If you look at Eduardo's maybe Instagram, post or even LinkedIn posts, it's a lot about other people. And it's all these different people. And it really, really shows. And honestly, it's a big reason why Eduardo is what I would consider a super connector. He's like everywhere with all these different people. I feel like he just knows everybody. The second growth strategy I want to talk about here is networking groups. And this growth strategy is one I actually touched upon a little bit in a recent deep dive I did with Aaron Rolandhagen about how these networking groups actually didn't go super well because the projects that she was looking for as a software development agency were like 100K plus is kind of like what she wants to get, and no one's just gonna like network you into those opportunities necessarily. You're gonna have to really grow relationships and build trust with people to get really these bigger contracts. But for Eduardo, right, these networking groups have actually been a really big and powerful way of building fearless communicators for him. And one particular networking group has actually been really helpful, and that is Business Network International. And there's a big reason why that's helped, and it's because of this concept of givers gain. But let me actually have Eduardo explain this motto and this concept of givers gain.
The whole point is that business is relational, not transactional. And I think that that's a huge lesson to learn. Ultimately, people will sell you algorithms. They're going to sell you marketing. They're going to sell you whatever. I think business at the end of the day is about relationships, and you need to tend to those relationships, and relationships are fragile. So you need to pour into your relationships. And as part of this networking group, the motto was givers gain. What I chose to give was 30 minutes of my time, because in this networking group, everyone had 30-second to 45-second commercials and or once a year, 10-minute presentation that they got to showcase themselves for their entire group. So I said, I will give 30 minutes of my time to make those 10 minutes of yours extraordinary. So then what people got was not just like, oh, I get public speaking support, but now they really understood what I'm able to provide and the difference that I'm able to make. So that not only completely and totally up leveled everyone's public speaking game, but it also up leveled the entire public speaking game of that chapter. So when people are visiting, they're like, what's happening in these presentations? This is extraordinary. And I'll give you a quick example. There was an IT guy, and the question that I always ask people is, what do you love? And I'm a big fan of metaphor, and people are like, I'm an IT guy, hi, this is my name. I work in IT. This is my company, and here's my slide deck. And then this is like how I work with clients. And then here's one client testimonial. That's like your garden variety, boring, 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 dull, 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 10-minute presentation. Instead, I ask people, what do you love? And the thing that what I knew about this IT guy is what he loved is Greek mythology. So his 10-minute presentation was how the three major stories of Greek mythology would have ended differently if they had an IT guy. So we took the Iliad, we took the Odyssey, and we took the Aeneid, and we kind of spun like, if Odysseus, had an IT guy, then maybe he wouldn't have like roamed around the Mediterranean for a decade. And how would the Trojan War have looked like, if they had an IT guy, to discover the Trojan horse, right? So then we were able to play with Greek mythology and then also infuse his passion of Greek mythology into his expertise as an IT guy. That's probably the most memorable IT guy presentation that anyone has ever heard. Fusing passion, what you love, immediately shifts how you can share about what it is that you do. And that not only made the meetings entertaining, but then again, it gave people a flair and a flourish of how it is that I work. And then it made it easier for them to refer me. I also did them a solid. I gave you. Now it just karma. You feel more compelled to give to me. Not that you're counting on it. I'm a giver. And I'm very aware of the people that give back to me, and I'm aware of the people that don't. And that doesn't necessarily always impact how I get to those people. But I'm also clocking. It's like, where's your generosity?
So if you're wondering what it's like to work with Eduardo a little bit as a public speaking coach, you got a little bit of a taste of it there. But the big concept right here is the spirit of generosity and really just giving into people. And again, investing in your network. And even if you're part of these these networking groups that where you're going to give referrals and you're going to get referrals, right? Like the main concept here, right, is still to invest in people, be generous with people. And if you keep doing this and you keep doing this with the right people, right, good things are going to come to you. And again, it goes to this concept, right, of who do you want to attract? What do you want to attract in the world? If you're going to be positive and loving on people, that's what you're most likely going to get back. And if you're going to be negative and critiquing people, that's what you're going to get back as well. So it's a good way of going about networking groups because, right, it's not just this transactional way. Be generous and not necessarily expect things back, but expect that like over time, things will come back. And not only has Business Network International kind of adopted this motto of givers gain, but right, places like Techstars also had to like give first, which to me is a very similar concept, if not the same concept. So a lot of different groups are having the same concept and it really does work. It's a long play, not a short-term play. The third growth strategy I want to talk about here is events. And I love this for two reasons. First is that, right, if you go onto Eduardo's personal website or even the Fearless Communicators website, you're going to notice that Eduardo not only is coaching people and training people how to do public speaking, but he does it himself. He does a lot of public speaking, especially as an MC at events or even hosting his own events, maybe virtually or even in person in New York City. And that's really awesome, right? Because it's showing like, hey, I'm not only, going to tell you people, but I'm actually going to show you how to do it. And the second reason why I love this is it creates like this very small flywheel of growth, which could, eventually become a really big growth strategy if you really invest in it. And this is similar to how, like when I talked about with Terry Rice and his deep dive about how that, just teaching actually creates a flywheel of growth for that. And the way it works, right? So you'll see Eduardo, he'll MC an event, he'll show expertise and build trust with his audience, right? He's there for an hour or two. And right with his introduction, or maybe even just mentioning like, hey, I do this for a living. I do public speaking, right? There's probably even little opportunities to kind of pitch that a little bit in, small comments. He's showing like, hey, people, you can public speak too. You can bring your whole self and you can be this energetic MC or this energetic public speaker. And he's showing you how to do that. He's building the trust, he's building the expertise, right? And the audience is now aware of, okay, like, hey, he's actually really good. And he's actually, he can teach me how to do this because he does this as a living. And with that, right, the audience could become potential clients for his public speaking, training and coaching, but also, right, they also could maybe hire him as an MC for maybe one of their events as well, right? Because sometimes, right, people are an audience, they might host their own events as well. So it creates this nice little flywheel of growth, which is really cool. So I love the work Eduardo and his team at Fearless Communicators are doing because it could be a space that's quite competitive with public speaking coaching, but I would argue that Eduardo and his team have really found this kind of blue ocean. They've created their unique niche. They've become their one of one by really getting away from this tried and true methods of public speaking, not these intellectual exercises, and they've really taught people that it's more of a physical, emotional, and spiritual process to really bring your whole self for public speaking and become a public speaker that brings your whole self to it. It's something that I really love, and I really love when people take their own spins on maybe tried and true things and do it in a better way. And this entire business for Fearless Communicators is one that's very clear that Eduardo's been able to take his own spin on, crafting a business, and he brings his entire self to it. And that's what makes Fearless Communicators really unique. Now, if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more content like this, I highly recommend checking out the newsletter in the description below.